Hemshech Hayim Beis, Volume 1. We're at Maimer, Discourse 42. Eila Hadvarim, page 331. The bottom of 331. Shin Lamed Aleph. And the Frierdiker Rebbe says that the summary of this discourse is Chemer Tzura Tikkun Zman. Okay, we'll explain what that is when we get there. So, the previous discourse began with the discussion with Torah is also Mamutza. So just to put everything into broad context. The broad context is like this. To understand the difference between the two types of energies, or better put, to understand the interface that is between the divine existence, and we have the two forms of energy, the infinite energy, the transcendent energy, and the immanent energy, the Bligvul, the Gvul. With the first one, the immanent energy is the energy that enters and permeates, penetrates existence. And the transcendent energy is the one that lifts up existence and introduces a bittul. So it allows existence to experience that which is beyond itself, transcendence. To understand that, when the whole discussion that began from the beginning of the Shavuos discourse in Act 2 of Ayin Beis, to understand that began the difference between the Sinai and the patriarchs, the Matan Torah and the Avos. That was back to page 130. That even though the Or Pnimi, which is divine energy within existence, also brings bittul, but its power of bittul is only through the transcendent energy. To understand that, he went through a whole discussion of the difference between the Avos and Matan Torah, which really was, I would say, a type of, you could say, what's the word I want to use? An execution, an implementation of that which we discussed earlier theoretically. In the first part of the discourse, from Shavuos Ayin Beis to Vayigash Ayin Gimel, which was 1912 till the winter of 1912, there the Rebbe Rashab laid out the dynamics of the Er HaGvul and Er HaBligvul, the structured, integrated energy and the transcendent energy, and how the integrated energy is rooted in the 10 hidden spheres. Now the 10 hidden spheres are rooted in the transcendent energy, and all the meanings in the word sphera and all the three meanings in the word keser, laying out the basic building blocks of the interface. I would say with part 2 or act 2, which begins Shavuos Ayin Gimel, in other words Shavuos 1913, the Rebbe Rashab starts going deeper into the role that these energies play, the role that Er HaMakif or Er Bligvul plays, which is to introduce that transcendence. And to understand that, we have it become the execution of who in history, how did this play itself out? The Avos were the ones that actually brought in the Er HaGvul all the way to its root, which is actually beyond just the minimum measure necessary, Kav Hamida, the line that measures, that gives energy into existence. They brought it all to the root, laying the stage for Matan Torah to come and introduce the Er Chadash, a completely new transcendent energy that would help transform existence, which is the power that Matan Torah gave. And to explain that, the Rebbe Rashab went through all the levels from Midas and Moichin, which again is about going through the levels of the structure of existence as you climb back to retracing the root back to the source. So the structure of existence is step by step. You connect, like we talked about spheres. We talked about first number, and then the story, and then the inner story, and then all the way to illumination, a brightness, sapir, the transparence, and leading us back all the way to the latest discussion of Atzilus, with asking the question, if it's the Kav Hamida, if the Avos lead from higher the Kav Hamida, doesn't everything go through the line of measurement? Explaining the difference between Kav Hamida and Knei Hamida. That everything goes, yes, through the line of measurement, but there's something higher than the Kav Hamida, which is the Knei Hamida, which is more than just the minimal regulation of the flow. it's a maximum regulation of a maximum element of the flow, also going through that Kav Amida, as we learned in the previous discourse. Just a second. Right. So the Knav Amida, the Knei Amida rather, is the Chochmah. The measurement as it is according to Chochmah, and that is more than just that measurement that was necessary for creation. They brought in more. And then of course Mountain Torah will bring in even beyond that. So to explain that, he began with the whole thing with Torah. To start going into from Ovis, now we go to Torah, we're moving to the Bligvul. So the Torah is also a Medida. We call that a Medida Atzmis. A Medida, the Torah is Gvura, but it's a Medida that the Torah is defined by measure not because of its limitation, but because of its intensity. Coming from an intense place of the core and the source, it comes out like drops. That's why the Torah comes into a structure. And he explained that this is the whole idea of the interface that the Torah, that Atzilus is. The interface of Atzilus is the interface between the divine in existence. Yeah. Because going back to what he discussed earlier on, connecting it all back again, because Atzilus has in it like Eir and Keli, Chachma and Malchus, Chachma La, Chachma Tata, and this is also the interface of Torah. So now we're dealing with an aspect of the interface that is going to connect the Bligvul and the Gvul. How's that possible? Because the Eir HaGvul, as we discussed, is part of the Eir HaBligvul, or is an extension of it. And that's what Torah does. So though he said this idea in the earlier section of the Hemshech, but now he's bringing it back to the actualization of it, as I said, implementation, execution of it through the Avis, and then through Torah, how Sinai concludes that process, or you can say begins that process of bringing in this new energy, this Er Chadash. Okay. But to explain that, he went into Ak. Because truly the Chachma of Torah is not just the Chachma of Atzilus, is the Chachma of Ak. And he explained that Ak serves as an interface not between Bligvul and Gvul. Once you already have the Tzimtzum, which establishes that there's an infinite distance of the divine, and we can relate to that, meaning it's in existence, the Tzimtzum, as opposed to, say, the Ramak, where he sees all of existence in a form of cause and effect, meaning relating to the divine is something that is ultimately has some commonality. So that allows then Ak to come and introduce a closeness. Ak is the klal to prat. That Ak is like the general picture that allows us to then connect to the specific picture. So if I can sum it up, then what we really have is like this: that the Rebbe Rashab is doing here in this part that we didn't learn earlier. For number one, he's explaining how Torah becomes the interface. This was not discussed earlier, only very briefly. And more importantly, he's discussing how we actually go from Gvul to Bligvul, how we actually can climb from the structured existence that we, as we know it, to a beyond structure with transcendent energy, which is the divine consciousness of the Eir HaBligvul. But in order to understand that, there's a whole bunch of steps. He begins by saying that Atzilus is the interface. He begins by speaking about that. But then, there's a fundamental problem. And I believe this is where the last chapter, Tzimtzum, is so critical in the whole discussion. The problem is like this: that if Atzilus is the interface, which, as we said, without Atzilus we wouldn't have Yediyah and Hargasha, we wouldn't have knowledge, awareness of the divine, nor would we have a feeling for the divine in this world. That's what Atzilus does. The question, how can Atzilus bridge Gvul and Bligvul when they're so distant? The answer is because Elikus itself envisioned Gvul. So therefore, the gvul of the structure of existence is rooted in somewhat divine, some divine image of it. In other words, it's really a medida atzmis. Because from the divine perspective, gvul is just another expression of the divine ability to do anything. But the dilemma that remains is, and I guess this is where Torah really comes into play, is how do we connect to that? We could say that the structure of existence is rooted in the structure that God envisioned in the 10 hidden spheres. But there's still an element of Beira and Nivra. That only explains finite and infinite. There's still an element that we're a creature and God is the creator. And where's the bridge of that? And that bridge is far harder to bridge because creator and creation are infinitely distant. And the answer to that is, in other words, you could say, okay, fine, we have chesed in this world, but it's the chesed of the creatures. It's not the chesed of Elokus. For example, even by the animal kingdom, you find that they have benevolence. You find animals can be kind to each other. In nature, not through choice. Their nature there's a certain element of kindness. You find it in nature. There is an element of... So you could say that chesed is rooted in the deepest chesed of the 10 hidden spheres. But you can't compare an animal with godliness. They're infinitely distant. And more than that, even the highest levels of the whole cosmic order are equal to the creatures of this existence. Everything is equal. So he says that's the chiddush of the Arizal. The Arizal with the Tzimtzum, the Tzimtzum gives us a tzir, gives us a sense of this infinite distance. And once we have that sense of that infinite distance, it helps bridge the issue. Because if you weren't aware of it, that's where the real problem is. So the Ramak, as he said, Lo Yodam Inat Tzimtzum, the Ramak speaks and has to speak like all the Mukabbalim. They have to speak at good levels. They have no quantum leap to account for this so-called unbalancing of the equation. They have no quantum leap. So what they have to do is go Ila v'Ol. It's true that the Keser is more distant from Ein Sof than it is from existence, Asiyah, or are the lowly creatures of this world, as he put it. But still, there's a commonality. It's closer to Ein Sof than we are. That already is telling you you're dealing not with Ein Sof that is beyond everything. You're dealing with an Ein Sof that's already relative to existence. The Tzimtzum, as I discussed at length, allows us to comprehend and relate to a type of infinite distance, and we can meditate on it and contemplate on it. And that allows for this element of the interface to come into play. Then when Ak comes into the picture, it's already telling us how now we can relate to the divine. Because you've already established that the divine is Shalei Berach. You've already established that the divine is completely, infinitely distant. Once you've established that, then there's a structure that, like he says, where the teacher, who is infinitely distant than us, now applies himself and comes closer to the student. Now that would be limited and compromised if you didn't know that he was infinitely distant, if there was no tzimtzum, or you weren't aware of its tzimtzum. Once you're aware of its tzimtzum, now we can talk about yes. And then there's how godliness comes closer to us, and how each level allows us to relate more to him. So the tzimtzum essentially is really, in a way, really teaches us what Makif truly is. Remember we said the deepest bittul comes from the transcendent energy that's beyond existence. The transcendent energy, according to the Arizal, is far deeper than the transcendent energy of the Ramak. According to the Ramak, Keser, which is transcendent energy, at the end of the day has similarity both to existence, and it relates to Ein Sof, not the truest element of Bligvul. It has to relate to, like he said, there's some commonality. According to the Arizal, because of the Tzimtzum, the transcendent is completely beyond. So Keser, Atik of Keser, is really a piece of Atzmus, like he said, Tachtein Shebemaitzel. That concept does not exist in the Ramak, the concept of Tein Shebemaitzel. Now it wouldn't exist with the Arizal either if he didn't have Tzimtzum, because how could there be so-called the lowest level, or God manifesting in a type of Er HaGvul, which is the Shir Atzmei B'Koyach that he envisions and allocates and estimates something that's structured, if he's infinitely beyond it. But once you say he's infinitely beyond it, then you could say yes, and then he decided to place a piece of it within existence. Not because it's relative to us, but because that's what he wants. It's a very different type of relationship. Whereas if you go with Seichel Anushi, with intelligence, and you don't have a Tzimtzum, all you can come to is relate to a God that relates to us. which means we relate to the godliness that's within our existence, except it's beyond existence. But beyond, that's also relative, ultimately. So this is, of course, a very profound Chiddush in Chassidus about what the real Tzimtzum meant. I just wanted to add, we also have the other extreme. So really, there are three opinions. There's Ramak la Yoda min Tzimtzum, there's Tzimtzum Kipshute, and there's Tzimtzum as we understand it based on the Alter Rebbe, which is not Kipshute. So I just wanted to establish I'll just explain in a moment what those three different opinions, what consequences they would have in our lives. So the Ramak la Yoda min Tzimtzum, as I said, basically means we have a relationship with God, but as a God that is relative to us. It was the part of Elokus that is beyond us. When it says Moshe Ponai lo yiro, means literally, you just cannot see him, and then don't go there. It's completely a mystery, and we have no relationship with it. Our relationship as servants and creatures of God is with God as He chose to manifest in a way that's commensurate to us to some extent. So even though the Ramak Taka holds that Keser is not Ein Sof, because Ein Sof is beyond anything, but in a strange way, by saying that itself, it also tells us that Ein Sof that we do relate to is one that is more related to us. So that would be, what would that be? The consequence of that would be that we really can only have a relationship with God that, number one, is ultimately somewhat some commonality between us and the divine. So yes, Mahu Chanun, Nafhu Ata Chanun. So there's the relationship, we can emulate God's ways. And Temer Dver, actually, which is another sefer of the Ramak, talks about how we emulate God's ways. But what we don't have is a true relationship with the divine on the terms of the divine. It would be like having a relationship with the Rebbe, where the Rebbe is a Bar Seichel, as the Rebbe relates to us. But his part of him that is beyond, no connection at all. It's Merem and Menusa, not connected to us. Which really means that it's not a true partnership. Because essentially our connection to the Eibishter is only what we can relate to. That part which the Eibishter in his full glory, we cannot have a relationship with. That would be the il of the Ramak. Which is not a bad relationship, but that's where the limit would be.
But he also agrees that the Ein Sof
exists, but you can't relate to it with Seichel. It's Amunah. It would be pure Amunah, and it would be Ein Lo Noisig when it starts, or what does it say? Not the thing. Hashem Hastaris La Hashem Elokeinu, or Leilachshav Al Mal Lefonim Malacher means Kipshute. Like the in Kabbalah Gufa, the Ramak would be more like that's called the Nijdich Sidim, compared to the Sidim. In Kabbalah itself, the Dakos. That would be like, which really has a lot of consequence. It would be maybe there's more focus in Shiflus Adam than Gadlus HaKeil. Because your Gadlus HaKeil is not the real Gadlus HaKeil. It's at the end of the day, it's Gadlus HaKeil relative to your... That would be like one example. Another example would be that you really cannot enter, when we talk about the Osed Lovi, we say that Rashi says there, by in Shekenim Shikos Pure, the Seydis and Rozim, the Seydis Rozitata would be there, but it wouldn't be the ultimate. I mean, there's a lot of elements that you could explain that. That's the Ramak in Ilva.
Before the Arizal,
that's how
and everyone, they did not know about the Tzimtzum.
Look, the same question you could ask. Moshe Rabbeinu did not know what Rabbi Akiva was teaching. They knew the Klolim, but Lav Dafka they knew the Ezgitaish Pratim. It didn't come this man. I mean, it's not a Pella. This one says Mashiach comes. You'll see Yilmud Kolei Al Kulei, also Rashbi, and also the Ovis, and also Moshe Rabbeinu. And then Moshe itself will recognize this is all what I was taught. That's not a Pella. That's like that's Klal Prat. It's Kol Masha Talmud Basur Lechad. And everything also has its man. There's a reason that is on Bizman was given the Gili. Remember, we're talking Torah here. Not that Rizal was smarter than the Rashbi. He couldn't decide. If the Rashbi was Noam Rizal, that's what he would have been Megala. So we're not talking here popularity contest. Like they said, Alter Rebbe would have been Tanoim, would have been Atan. Everything is in its man, because now when you read Arizal, you find it in the Zehav, you find it hinted. Even psukim like Bereshis Bara Lakim and Eretz Yisrael has a different meaning once you know there's a tzimtzum. And I would say even more, I said this already. In the time of Ramak, or before that is, maybe it was necessary first to establish the relationship, like Ramak is almost like the Ovis, and Arizal is like Matan Torah in the discussion. The Ovis, first, you can't come to Matan Torah before you first reach Eir HaGvul. So it could be, first you have to go through the Ramak's understanding of Ishtalshalos, which can then lead you to appreciate that Arizal. It could even say that. Then comes Tzimtzum. Now Tzimtzum Kipshutei, which is like the Mishras Chassidim, Emmanuel Chayreki. And yeah, he's the first Mekubal that said it, and others followed. The Gra later held that opinion. But what the Rambam, the Alter Rebbe Sheil and Shaykhut Ramuna is what means Tzimtzum Kipshutei. Tzimtzum Kipshutei means that they actually see that God removed himself completely. He's the exact opposite extreme of the Ramak. Tzimtzum Kipshutei, if the Ramak says we have a relationship, but it's not with the Etzem, Tzimtzum Kipshutei says the opposite. We have no relationship at all. And the only way we could exist and do our Aveda is if God completely has to not have any connection to us. So in other words, it's the exact opposite extreme of the Ramak. The Ramak says we have a relationship, but the relationship is with a certain dimension, not higher. Tzimtzum Kipshutei would argue the opposite, that it's completely the Shalei Be'erech is what reigns. In other words, it's a complete distance. I would say, if Ramak would say Shiflus Adam, but also Gadlus Hakel, and Tzimtzum Kipshutei would say only Shiflus Adam, because you have no connection. Elikus is not. This is like Mamash Musar. It's the extreme. The only way you can connect to the divine is if you negate yourself, basically. So the Ramak would say, no, you can find the divine within yourself, but realize that the divine is not the ultimate divine. Eir HaGvul, ultimately. One second, let me just finish. Tzimtzum Kipshutei is also a shit of Gedalim, and it's not a shit, the Rebbe makes it very clear, and their intention was not to diminish God, like in Perek Beis of Shaykhut, not to say God is too great for this existence. In other words, like they say, God cannot come down, Oz of Hashem, because not the opposite. It's because of God's greatness that he cannot connect to. Because of God's greatness, he's able to remove himself. So he doesn't. The example in Mishnas Chassidim, he has a sefer called Yeshua Lavav. That's where he posits the position of Tzimtzum Kipshutei. He says it's like a melech that looks through a window in Mokim Tenefis. A king who looks through a window at the places of waste and garbage, because he can't be there. Now think for a moment, before the Alter Rebbe, like the Rebbe says, you could ask, well, what does that mean? How could God not be there? Like the Alter Rebbe says, B'mikrei haguf, what God is physical. That's after that Alter Rebbe was makabel from his teachers, that's not Tzimtzum Kipshutei, but God can do anything. The Rebbe makes it very clear. God's infinite power, he can remove himself, even though we don't understand what that means. Which really means that we don't have an understanding of God's relationship with existence. Which brings us back to the Shlei Berach. So in a way, their understanding, the Rebbe said to the Rashag at the meal, Shmini Atzeres, Tavshin Lamed Aleph, when he was Mavatal, the Rebbe said, Mavatal? That Al Pi Seichel actually leitzach med Tzimtzum Kipshutei. Al Pi Seichel, in other words, Al Pi Logic, is more it seems more that it's not logical. Because no logic exists there. So in other words, logic should dictate that we have no understanding of God. The fact that we could have an understanding of God is less logical, because logic is a creation of God. You understand the reverse? So to try to understand God, that's a chiddush. It would be more natural to say God is called beyond us. You want to have a relationship. It's a gift God gave you. You have to basically abrogate yourself, subjugate and completely annihilate yourself. So Achdus Hashem is through the annihilation of Tachtenim, not through the permeating Tachtenim. By getting rid of our limited perspectives, by getting rid of our finite structures. So a mitzvah is not meant to bring a lakus into premise of existence. It's meant to get rid of the shell of existence so you could experience the divine infinite. But only when you don't exist. Its consequences would be that like Nadav Avihu and Banazai would seem to be right, or the Meraglim would seem to be right. That the goal is to be here but not be here. So it's like almost the opposite extreme of the Ramak. Comes the pir of the Alter Rebbe, which is based, as the Rebbe says, is Makabel from Rabbi Yosef, that Tzimtzum is not Kipshute. What does it mean not Kipshute? That it's not literal, and it's also not an Atzmus. It's only an Eir, and only the lowest levels of Eir. There's another two opinions, by the way. The Tzimtzum Kipshute, but only an Eir. The Tzimtzum not Kipshute, but also in Moyer. The Chiddush of the Alter Rebbe is Tzimtzum Kipshute, but only in the lowest levels of Eir. So you could also explain the other three opinions also in similar ways. You could say Tzimtzum Kipshute, but in Eir is again, you can connect, but you're not connecting to Gili. If you say Tzimtzum not Kipshute, but it's in Moyer, you could say, Tzimtzum not Kipshute, but it's in Moyer also, then ultimately we don't connect with the Etzem. I mean, I'm not going to go through all of them right now. There's plenty you can say in all of them. I think I once wrote something up about it. But what I want to say here, Tzimtzum not Kipshute is the best of both worlds. The Tzimtzum allows us and teaches us that God is Shalei Be'erach. That which the Ramak says is off limits. So we have what Tzimtzum Kipshute has, the idea of Shalei Be'erach. But we also have Gilui. Because it's not a real Kipshute. It's not Kipshute. It's only a concealment. And it's not looking through a window. Atzmus is here. Not only Atzmus is here, but also Giluyim are here. They're concealed. And once you know that why they have to be concealed in order to bridge and say that it's really infinitely distant. But once you know that, and you can understand it with the Tzimtzum, you can relate also to the Ramak's Ilav Olol, and ultimately get to a point where you can combine both. Where you can Pone Le'yero means, in other words, not like the Ramak would say, we completely don't relate to it. Or also the Tzimtzum Kipshute would say, we don't relate to it because it's completely beyond us. And we only relate to the Shalei Be'erach. That here we can have, that you have the Shalei Be'erach, but you also can relate to it. That's the key. In the Ramak, you don't relate to it, because we relate, but we don't relate to the ultimate. In Tzimtzum Kipshute, you don't relate at all, you only relate to the ultimate without any type of closeness. And in Tzimtzum Shalei Kipshute, you have the best of both worlds.
There's no Be'erach at all with the Tzimtzum Kipshute.
Right.
No Be'erach at all.
There is maybe in the process of creation, but not in the process of avodah ultimately. You can't say completely. Even the Musarniks, that completely hold that you don't. Also, there is a mitzvah to know God, but it's not. But the focus is really the negative, that we are lowly and we have to eliminate our lowliness to experience. So it's all relative. You can't say it's completely nothing, no gili at all. But it's not the primary focus.
In Tzimtzum Shalei Kipshute,
it's more precious. It would be ultimately more precious.
What is the relations?
Separating yourself. What?
In Tzimtzum Shalei Kipshute, what is the relations with him?
So there's two things. In Tzimtzum Shalei Kipshute, remember that we have the Eir HaGvul is also part of the divine structure. And we can relate to that Eir HaGvul because it's the chesed of the world is the chesed of that. Now, if you didn't have Tzimtzum, you'd have to say that you're dealing with the lower level of the divine. But Tzimtzum accounts for. It's like saying basically this: once you know that Elokus is infinitely distant, then your relationship that's close it works, and it can lead you to that place too. Like I said, if you don't know it, what happens is it leads you only to a place of having a relationship with that which you can relate to. Tzimtzum alone is eizbaranus, that you can sit and think of how infinitely distant. The lashon of the Tzemach Tzedek and the Ayin is that Iyav shalitzayer that Shalei Be'erach on the Tzimtzum. It's not like God needs the Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum is a tool for us to be mitzayer what means Shalei Be'erach. Without the Tzimtzum, there's no way that the Ramak can be mitzayer. Can't picture it. The Tzimtzum allows for that type of idea of a quantum leap. Like the idea of Elokus b'pshitus elam is b'schashus. From the Ramak's point of view, all you can do is have a munah in that. But the Tzimtzum can allow you to think How could it be an existence that is agnostic, denies God's existence, thinks it's real, when in truth God is real, and we're the novelty? Tzimtzum allows you to imagine the possibility of turning perception inside out. With the Ramak, there's no perception inside out. It's the matter, it's off limits. Tzimtzum Kipshute does the opposite, as I said. It just tells you that God is beyond everything and can do whatever He wants, but we have no way to relate to that. So there's no closeness at all.
So
It's either total. Basically, the Ramak is the element of Avos Hashem, Kiruv. Tzimtzum Kipshute would be ultimate Yiras Hashem without too much Kiruv. And Tzimtzum Shalei Kipshute has Ava and Yira, has Richuk and Kiruv. It's really what it comes down to in our Veda.
So the Tzimtzum Shalei Kipshute, this is the Alter Rebbe's Chidush. That from the Rizal itself, we don't know.
Right, there are Talmidim that said like this, and there's the Talmidim that said like this. And the Alter Rebbe, the Rebbe says clear, head from Zayin Rabbeim, that Tzimtzum Shalei Kipshute. The Alter Rebbe is not the first to say. The Shemer Amunim also says Tzimtzum Nish Kipshute. So it was before that, the Alter Rebbe. But some say that Shemer Amunim is a different Tzimtzum Shalei Kipshute than the Alter Rebbe. Some say the Shemer Amunim is more Tzimtzum Nish Kipshute, but also in Etzem.
But also, what was the last one?
Yosef Irgas,
What was the last one? Tzimtzum Kipshute, but
also in Atzmus.
also.
There's a letter from the Rebbe that speaks about the four opinions in Tzimtzum itself. It's Shtayim Shem Arba. Kipshute, not Kipshute, Etzem and Moyer and Oyer.
Rabbi Yisrael does even Magil and Mevarsha?
Yeah, the pastors who themselves received it. Yeah. From the Arizal just says Tzimtzum Atzmusei, Tzimtzum Eir. You know, he writes as Malach Lametzias, and then Tzimtzum Eire. Doesn't say it's a whole sugya. I mean, as I said, there are those that the Gra learned Tzimtzum Kipshut. The Reb Chaim Volozhiner went away from the Gra and he learned Tzimtzum Shalei Kipshut. The Rebbe says it's Nira that he was affected by Tanya.
I just want to mention.
The Rebbe writes in the letter. Tafrish Tzadik Tes. He writes in the letter to Binyaminson, Chmil Binyaminson, Montreal, the Chosin. So the Rebbe writes, and he writes that Chaim Volozhiner, Knira also did not all the way understand the Alter Rebbe. So he also learned Tzimtzum Nish Kipshute, but in Etzem, in Moyer. So the Alter Rebbe is also only in Eir and only the lowest levels of Eir. That's what the Rebbe says. Just to give you. But the Rebbe wrote it. The Rebbe, right? The Rebbe wrote this letter to the Rebbe before the Nesius. Yeah. A few years later, 3 years later, the Rebbe wrote back the second letter to him and said, I don't know if you, with Tefus, the nafkamina of what I wrote to you about the Tzimtzumim, about the Shittas and Tzimtzum, that according to our Shitta, the Rebbe writes these Be'ezeh Loshen, means that the Moshe Rabbeinu and the Rashbi B'Teicha Idra and the Baal Shem Tov and the Magid and all the Rabbeim Zaymitlun's Mamash Kipshute. Because since it's Tzimtzum is Kipshute, so that was the Rebbe's so-called nafkamina. In other words, Vimel and Gimel Tammuz even. The Rebbe Mamash says it. That in other words, they're with us because Tzimtzum is Nish Kipshute. You have to say they're with us Mamash right now. Where Tzimtzum Kipshute, you could say they're not. They're not with us, meaning they're in a different dimension. We're not saying they don't exist, but their dimension has nothing to do with our dimension. See, that's what it comes down to. None of these shittas, they're all Torah. They're all Apitera. And they're all based on Gadlus Hashem, not Chaz V'Shalom on Kfira. The Rebbe has a whole Sikha, Tavshin Mem. It's one of the first year I wrote Sikhas, Dvorim, Tavshin Shabbos Chosein. It was a Fabring until 8 o'clock. The last hour the Rebbe spoke about this sugya, because we had asked questions. And he said, he was Machalik. Pedig Beis in Tanya talks about Loike, Das Minim, B'dech is ever, yeah. Tachamar Sheneim, that they, Damim, Elokus, to Yesh Miyesh, Keli. So by them it's Mitzad Chesodin Elokus. So they were says Yesh Miyesh, so Kenan is Zayin da. Mitzad Chesodin. It says in Pedig Zayin, in the Shatzim Shkun, Mitzad Gadlus Hashem, nicht Mitzad Chesodin. Mitzad Gadlus Hashem, that he can't associate this with garbage. So B'keiche HaKol, B'il Bal Gvul. Basically the Ramak sees existence, a relationship with a Gvul, of Elokus. The Tzimtzum Kipshute will say we have a relationship with the Bligvul of Elokus, but that means we're not there. We have to basically Prisha. precious, asceticism, and Chassidus has the combination of both, which is the hardest one to reconcile. Beide. The gvul mitzad vala kechei shem sheyesh lekechei bilti bagvul kach yesh lekechei begvul. So there's Eira gvul. The tzimtzum accounts for the shalei be'erech, and that ak and say the shtalshus accounts for the kiruv. Then it's both. It's the Eira. You have beide zaiten from them. That's how it. It's a very. What?
It's the most powerful thing because the world.
Interessant, huh? Was sagst du? Your mamish have the shittas. These are like, you really see three approaches to Judaism, to the world, and they're real nafkaminas. There's halacha, there's practical nafkaminas in the three of them.
This point that you said before, that the Rebbe said that.
Can I get from the Caleb, not from them alone. But Chabad will sein the Caleb.
What Zayin in Kalim is always came from Kalim.
That's right.
What you said before from the Rebbe, that everyone is with us. But there is such a concept of a goof.
No. Say with us. Listen, it's still not vila asad love. Tzimtzum kipshute doesn't mean lasad love that medazemed ene basar. Tzimtzum kipshute means it's here, but we don't see it. Tzimtzum shlei kipshute means it's pashat not here. What means not here? It means we can never relate to it on our terms. That's what it means. That's what it is. So obviously, helam is nizazel b'zach v'nishta. Helam means that. No, it would be like the neshama is dobadir, even if it's not meir begoli. Or someone will say the neshama, even if the neshama you could say is by you, besides being nish meir begoli, you could say you'll never relate to it. We're megushamim. When neshama is too edel for us to relate to, that would be like tzimtzum kipshute. It's too edel. That's not correct. So this says through Avedi Kamiyah. In other words, it's a matter of mechus and maisa, and mechus zman, not a matter of fundamentally impossible. That would be the point here. Is not whether it's here or not. The point is whether we can relate to it on our terms. That's really what it comes down to. Remember, Gans Chassidus basically is in this battle. If you can't relate to it on our terms, and then what are we learning? We're learning Baseder Shtalshus. We're learning. I mean, according to the Ramak, makes sense. We're learning the levels we can reach. Simsur Kipshute would say there's no reason to learn Kabbalah. That's why the Gra said that was not an Indian to learn Primus Atera. He learned it, Yichid Gula. But the idea that a regular person, you can't, because it's Elakus. It says, ain't learn basic but studies, learn Nigla.
So what's the Rebbe betzem gesagt, als Moshe Rabbeinu ist don, Rabbi das meint, aber da vormen zu der Sendos, da vormen zu anerkennen.
It's a big difference if something is here and you don't see it, or it's Bechlal on a different plane. You could say a neshama leaves this world. You could. There's no sudden on a munah to say it goes on a different plane. You cannot relate to it. That's it. It's over with. Because we're megushamim, and Neshama is now in the duchnis. But to say that Neshama is here, meaning what does it mean here? Remember, we're not talking about Malkum. Even if you say it's not here, even if according to the opinion that you can't relate to it completely, it's just also here. But we say here, we don't mean Mokim. We mean here relating.
But not reachable.
Huh?
You cannot.
No, besides visual, that's helam. When I say here, it means that even if it's behel, I just told you, neshama, you have a neshama. It's inside of you. Can you relate to it or can you not relate to it? Even if you're not relating to it now, the answer is, it's only a helm out of a helm. You can work on it and you can relate to it. So in other words, yes, through work you can relate to the Rabbeim as if they're with you like this. It's a far deeper connection.
That's why you saw that the Rebbe went to the Eil, or even after the Eil. His relation was...
There'd be a lot of nafkaminas. It would mean, for example, they can arbeiten do, duruchuns. If you said kipshute, it seems to kipshute, you could say they don't work through us. We're on our own, essentially. They watch us from their place. They pray for us. But can they work through us? I'm giving you an example. You want an example? They can work through you. You have much more power, basically. That's what it comes down to. You have more gil, you have more keiches. I mean, it can go. It's a matter of. It is more relationship. I was just reading the Frierdiker Rebbe says Shavuos Tavshin Gimel. He says the Baal Shem Tov. So he says it starts like this. The end of the Sikha there. He says Shas Miret wegen Baal Shem Tov hert. Then he says Shin 183 Jahre sind der Baal Shem Tov steht an Eis Dachachus. Und als es Dachach mehr. Well, Yedua as I'll translate in a minute. And Yedua as the chesed in the Shmiya is not mitzad the klei ha'ezen. Is am shtei bis dachachus is zicher hertman. Was mer is dachachus, was mer hertman. That's the word. So you don't have to say that. You could learn kipshutei that he's in his world and we're in our world. What he said was that the Baal Shem Tov is hearing what we speak here, and it's 183 years. That was how much it was in Tavshim. Since the Baal Shem Tov is in a state of deep refinement, and gets more and more refined, and the only limit in hearing is when the weakness of the keli of the hair. So when someone's more refined, he hears better. So he hears even better than in other words, people with ears would hear. What you're trying to relate to, you can't relate to Gashmish, you have to relate to Naruchnis de Keveg. The question comes down to how much on our terms can we relate to Ruchnis. You know the story with it's a story with the Rebbe Marash. So Lubavitch, the Rabbeim lived in there was a Chotzer, right? The Chotzer was like a U. So there was the B'zal, there was the houses of the Rabbeim. So it was connected. And you could go from inside the building, you can go into the shul, to the Zal. But the Rabbeim usually walked outside, they didn't go through the building. So there was in the corner, there was in the shul, there was a bigger shul, there was a smaller shul, Cheder Sheni. At the end of the Cheder Sheni, there was a door that went like a hall to the Rabbeim's apartments. I mean, each Rebbe as he lived there. And the Rabbeim, when they lived, the families lived. So, one night there was a chassid of the Rebbe Marash who was also a chaver with him when they were young. He was learning around midnight. Suddenly he sees the door open from the hall, which is very rare. And the Rebbe Marash is walking into the Zal. This is Cheder Sheni. And from the way he was walking, it looked awkward. He was walking very weird way, awkwardly. So Rabbi Chmiel stood up, and the Rebbe Marash saw. So he said to the Rebbe Marash, said to me, I'm escorting someone. So Rabbi Chmiel was a real chassid, and he was a smart chassid, so he didn't say, I don't see anybody. He just said, Vu the Rebbe zechez gelernt bagleiten. No, it's where the Rebbe learned how to escort. So the Rebbe Marash answered, I'll tell you. When I was a child, I learn Chassidus 15 minutes after Ma'ariv every night with my father. One night I come to this room, and the door is closed, which was odd, because whenever the door was closed, it meant there was a guest there. And when there was a guest there, my father would announce to the family that there's a guest tonight. He didn't announce anything. And it's my time to learn. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to peek in through the keyhole. And I looked in and I see that my father is there, and there's a guest, and according to the way it was described to me, the guest looked like my grandfather. The Mittler Rebbe, in other words. And this was already after the Stalkos. So he said I was a kid, so I was a Chag Hashem, it was my thing. I knocked on the door. It was my time to learn, so I want to go in. So the door, my father told me to come in, and he introduced me. He said to the guest, he kept calling him the guest. He said, the guest, he said to the guest, this is my youngest son, Shmuel. And so the guest said to my father, Rabbi Marash, is all telling this to Rabbi Rachmiel. Tell your son, tell Shmuel to say Havot Chassidus. So he's telling Rabbi Rachmiel, he says, I'm not going to go say Chassidus in front of my father, in front of my grandfather. So I told my father to tell the guest that he should say Chassidus, and I'll repeat it. He should say, and I'll repeat it. Okay, so the Mittler Rebbe started saying. And then he repeated it. He said, okay, he should repeat. He repeated it. And the guest said to my father that Dein Shmuels are good. He says good. Okay. Then my father escorted the guest out of the room. So that's where I learned how to escort. Made the Kamais. I forgot the last name. I saw Konikov wrote this up once.
It's very interesting.
Hold on, it's not over. Listen. He says, so that's where I learned how to escort. Rabbi Rachmiel was a real Chabad Chassid. His nishn is Paul geworden. He says, I wasn't given the Torah. You know? And what was the Chassidus? He wants to know what was said. It's not, he's just not looking for the miracle. So meanwhile, somebody walked into the Zal, into the Cheder Sheni, so the Rebbe Marash, someone simple, so the Rebbe Marash says, Nicht yet, we'll discuss another time. And Rebbe Marash went back to his room. The next morning, the Rebbe Rashab and the Razah and the Rebbe Rashab, the two young brothers, came running to Rabbi Chmiel and said, what happened here last night around midnight? So he said, if you know why you're asking me. So they said, we want to know how revealed it was. See, that's what I'm trying to say. No, they knew something happened, but Viva Bizgalos, that's the child. That's why I'm telling the story. In other words, you need to have stories of Chassidus and maybe a Hergish, but when we sing Tanigin, and the Rabbeim are there when they hear the Nigun, or David Seif Seimar, right? As when we learn Torah is, when the Eibishter is Nishdov and Kol HaKodesh V'Sheni connect the Kosh Baruch Hu, it's not here when we don't learn. Even according to Tzimshum Shalei Kipshute is here, even when we don't learn. So what happens when you're learning Taka and you say Kosh Baruch Hu Keder V'Sheni, or a Sifseis of David Ve'Smar, as a state, right? And when you learn a Tzadik's Vet, there is a Do, or a Nigun. How do you explain it? And that's not even according to the Shita of Tzimshum Nishke Pshute. You have to explain it that there's other states of his galus. I would say it's like how to be explained Dirsha Hashem b'motzi b'yesi karu b'yesi karu v'naser semei tshuva. But it's closer. So it's closer mitzad geluyim, meaning that there's a period where there's less layers that block. For us is the same helam. Someone says I don't see, not when I sing the nigun, I don't see when he do sing the nigun. That's because we're gushamim, and by us we only see tables, we only see holts. That's because of our limited vision. But there's an Edelkeit. For the Edelkeit, you could tell, and I think that's what the Rebbe meant.
The interesting thing is that he went through the Chayyim.
Simcha Kipshute basically, Simcha Kipshute basically what it does is, says there's a fundamental cutoff between Elokus and us. Not in a bad way. It's a cutoff because we can only relate it if we cut off from us. To have a lukus in our tziyur, in our tachtenim, there's always the idea of a shlichus, of going into the velt and trying to use velt to make it a keli lukus is not the derech. The derech is to be mevatel velt. And the more you mevatel velt, that's how you surmara is the ikar aved, the skafia, more than a sapcha.
This is the chiddush from Chassidus. It's a major chiddush.
Of course, it's a major chiddush, and you could argue the other way, but it's that's why sigufim is nishken derech. Perishus is nishken derech. Now the truth is, it was never a derech for everybody. Even those that did was Yechidus Gula. It wasn't like everybody just, Perishus was not the derech. But Dakus is what the Meraglim wanted. You can go on and on. The Rambam, who says the ultimate schar is neshamas without gufim. The Ramban schar with gufim. All of it is variations of the same issue. Obviously different levels of it. But all variations of whether you need to have, the key thing with Chassidus Chabad is, number one, is you need an atzmus that's beyond Gashmis and Ruchnis and beyond Mitzias built in Mitzias Nimsas, so all these things are not a limitation. Then you have to have, the Kavanah should be Birur HaElam, not Shviras HaElam. Even Ashbi, the first 12 years he comes out and everything burns. So it's like you say it's Chaz V'Shalom Asr? No, but it was so high. And Birur Elam, not Tikkun Elam, not Shviras Elam. But you have this constantly. You have constantly the two approaches. Not the Vaviyu, until there was the Isra, they didn't do something. Some call it a Chet, but there was no. It was Yain v'Shecher al Teish was afterwards. No one told them they're not allowed to do that. There was no Isra to do it. It was not in the spirit of what was supposed to be done. But there is a derech and aveda like that. That's why we learn about it. So it's a constant balance of the two. You constantly find through the Torah, you're going to always find these two approaches. With Chassidus Chabad, you have the Chiddush of Ala Gut Demailis. You have Atzmus Shlei Berach. You have Tachtena Shabatzmus, Atik within existence. You have Shlei Berach. You have the Eira Gvul within the Eira Bli Gvul. All combines for a very eloquent fusion. It's the ultimate interface.
Even by the Talmidim of the Magid, you had to...
Yeah, exactly. The Alter Rebbe, some people were against the idea of turning it into Slapshus and Chabad. That Chassidus is much more Amunah and much more Regesh, and not But there was a misunderstanding. They thought the Alter Rebbe was trying to understand Elikus. That was not the kavanah. The kavanah is Elikus is as a tif that could even permeate seichel. It's a big difference. It's not like I want to use my mind to understand God. That's where the tzimtzum comes to help. Is that godliness is so powerful that it doesn't need to negate the mind for you to experience it. It could even the mind becomes a keli. In truth, is as we learn Mamayla Mata, Chochma is simply Elikus, Tutzachon and Seichel. That's why it's bittul. And Bina, from a Matla Maila, we can be deceived in thinking that Seichel is like a stira to Kabbalah Seil. But in truth, is Seichel is just another form of Elikus. Like Keicha Bligvul going into Keicha Gvul. Era Bligvul into Era Gvul. It's Mededik. 100%. It's a true philosophical basis for how we live our lives.
And that's why you could have, I think Noam Chemala said that a small tzaddik loves a small Rasha. Big tzaddik loves a big Rasha. Mashiach will love even somebody that...
Yeah.
That's the whole idea.
Yeah. What needs more explanation is what is the difference now between the opinion of the Ramak and the Rameh. That the Ramak holds that Keser is a Sfira, and the Rameh holds it's not. The Rameh Mepano. The Pirush on the Ramak. The difference that the Ramak holds that Ein Sof is not Keser, the Rameh holds it is Keser. The difference between the opinions that hold the Sfiras have, are the Sfiras, does the Eris have shape and form or not? The Kelim. So they all are the similar idea of how much tziyur works in Elikus, but each ashita, I would say, covers another element of how you would apply it. It would be fascinating to go through every shita and explain its so-called its conclusions. But it's definitely consistent. Because the Ramak wants to connect that we have Atzmos. Yeah, the Ramak says that Kesed is not Ein Sof because he says you can't call anything but Ein Sof Ein Sof. You can't call Keser or Ratzon Ein Sof. The Rameh says you could. They're dealing with the issue of Shinui. With God, was he work through something? Basically, is there something that's Ein Sof that's not Elikus Mamash? The answer is the end of it is. The Chiddush of that Alter Rebbe is that it's Oyer. Because Oyer is another Chiddush here that helps to understand the picture. And the Chiddush is that there's Oyer. But the Ramak will say there's only Etzem, there's Ein Sof, and Kesed is removed. But that stems very much with what we're saying. Why is it stem? Because by the Ramak it's other. Either you have a relationship Ilav Alul, and then Ein Sof is completely removed and you can't have a relationship with it. Or, that's the two things, those other. According to the Rameh, you'd say that Ein Sof is Kesed, so you can have a relationship with it. But at the end of the day, you have to also say it's not really.
The Ramak would say that too, though.
There's a machlek. The Ramak says that Keser is not Ein Sof. So in other words, Keser is not Ein Sof, but it has a similarity to Ein Sof, so it's an Ein Sof that's commensurate to it. The Rameh, you'd say Keser is Ein Sof. You have to say it's also an Ein Sof. They're really the same opinion at the end of the day, in a certain way. Bottom line, when two things can't meet. I always talk about that the difference between the ultra-orthodox right wing and the ultra-liberal left wing are very similar. They say God and existence cannot coexist. So this one runs into God, and this one runs to the world. The same fundamental philosophical problem. So this one says, no, it's very much like simply. So the philosophical problem is that you don't have a full reconciliation. So you have to. That you have to give up one for the other. And the interesting thing is that they both have the same, they both talk about the same level of God. This one says, however, God can't come here, and I can't come there. So you have this dilemma, That's
the problem.
The Rameh, you have to say that Rameh's Keser is higher, but the Lakus is lower. And the Ramak's Ein Sof is higher, and the Ramak's Ein Sof is Kesed is higher.
With the Ramak,
With Ramak, with Kesser being, Kesser is not answer. 1 second. That means that you could only relate. You can't really relate to ultimate Ein Sof. Yeah, that's correct. The Rameh doesn't know from the Tzimtzum. So Behem Kesser is Ein Sof, but we have to negate more of us. The Rameh would be more like Tzimtzum K'Pshutei. That's what I just figured. The Rameh would say Kesser is Ein Sof.
Right.
That means you have to negate more of yourself to get that. The Ramak would say, no, Kesser is closer to us and has some similarity, so you relate, but you have less of the nature of the personality of Elikus. So the Rameh is a little like Rameh is in between Tzimtzum K'Pshutei and the Ramak.
So we're more comfortable with the Ramak.
I like that.
We're more comfortable.
That's good. Actually, the Tzemach Tzedek and the Tzemach Vav, he says that the truth is that Ramak is more correct, but there's a chsar in the Ramak because it doesn't account for the. So the Ramak, so that's where Eir comes in. Eir is the level that is outside. So Eir, the two things, Eir and Tzimtzum, are the two big chedushim that help resolve all the problems. And then there's Eir HaBli and Eir HaGvul. That's really good. Because Eir resolves the issue that there's something that is completely bottle, and therefore, and it conveying to both the closeness, and Tzimtzum is what conveys the distance. That's it. That's very Yishmak. Okay. So Eir ultimately conveys closeness, but not like the Ramak. You see, the Ramak's closeness is because we're inferior creatures. So God, so to speak, bends down to the child and gives us a relationship, and that's what you relate to. It would be the equivalent of you bending down to your child and giving him candies, but he only can relate to you when you bend down. He'll never relate to you when you're standing upright.
He agrees.
You hear what I'm saying? One second. And according to this, so Eir brings kiruv. The Ramak's kiruv is because like imagine a father bending down to a child, and the child can never relate to the father as he's in his own place. So fine, you have a relationship, but your father relationship is based on your terms.
The Ramak would never be a woman's liver.
1 second. That would be the Ramak. The Rameh would say, no, you can lift up, but you can't be your child. You can't stay as a child. You have to eliminate that. Tzimtzum K'Pshutei would say, B'chlal, you can't be you. And that is all. Tzimtzum Shalei K'Pshutei. Eir allows for the kiruv, and ultimately for Atik to be a Tachtenu Sheb'Maitzel, because Eir is itself Me'in HaMoyer, and because of Bittul. It doesn't say that piece here, but definitely helps understand. And Tzimtzum accounts for the Shalei B'Erech. So it's like so godliness does bend down to the child, but the child knows while it's bending down that it's not really his natural place. That's what Tzimtzum teaches you. That he's coming down, but know that really he's beyond you completely, and that you can climb and ultimately relate to him the way he's beyond you. That's the difference. So you have kiruv, but also richuk, because you're aware that this way the child can convince himself that's all his father is a guy who bends down and gives him candies, and that's all he knows.
They all agree that Atzmus is the same on the same level. The Ramak, the Mashal.
Ultimately, it definitely requires a deeper understanding of Atzmus. No, the Atzmus, look, with Amunah, you can go anywhere. You can say Atzmus is anything with Amunah. The challenge is not Amunah, the challenge is Seichel. How much we can understand and relate to Atzmus. Ramak Amunah could say Godesh is Amunah can go Bli Gvul. Ramak's Amunah could be judged deeper than our Seichel.
But we also say the same thing about Atzmus. Atzmus, not the real.
But Atzmus is not something we relate to. All these levels that we're talking about are relating to it. If you take out Eir, Tzimtzum, all this, then all you have is completely no relationship. Then Atzmus is Gewalt HaWelt, he wants a world, and that's it. What are you going to do now? It all comes down to how we understand it. That's the point. Nobody's, God forbid, saying that God is relative to us. It's saying what's our relationship with Him on our terms. That's what it comes down to. Atzmus could have a relationship with us complete, and no one understands it. No siddur. So then all the mitzvahs, v'yadaita, v'ahavta, are not on the level.
Why do they call them Mekabalim? It seems like they're trying to find
Mukubalim.
They seem to be trying to find a system that sort of fits what their ideas of this. Do they base it on is it any type of Kabbalah that they passed on from generations? Could they be doing what we're doing now? Could they be saying when they're figuring it out, Ramak, based on this, and real Kabbalah, or they sit and think and ponder and try to figure it out so it makes sense to them?
I don't understand the two options.
Like, we are basing it on we have a Kabbalah. This
And it's exactly by them too.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. The Ramak, when he writes about these things, he quotes all the Kabbalahs before him.
That's right.
That's what Kabbalah is.
That's what- yeah,
Kabbalah.
yeah, yeah. It seems like
And
you're
then,
right.
but once you quote, then comes to understanding what they're saying. Like the Ramak will say, there are two opinions. He has a whole gate that says, is Keser Ein Sof? And he brings, some Kabbalists say like this, some Kabbalists say like that. And then he comes to try to understand it. The Ramak did was codify. Ramak is very much like the Rambam of Kabbalah. He codified Kabbalah a lot. And he brought together opinions. But the Arizal was a different level. The Arizal is not so much a codifier. It's also, Eitz Chaim codifies a lot of the levels, but not quite so much the opinion. The Arizal does not quote many previous Kabbalists. The Arizal just gives it the picture. It's very different. And you need both, huh?
A new way.
And also you can see that Arizal was a Giluyim from you can see, is a certain, like the Tzimtzum and other things, he just says it. The Ramak wouldn't say something like that. The Ramak, you don't see open Ruach HaKodesh. You don't see a Tzimtzum. The Ramak, you see a collection of everything, then a very deep Havana and understanding. I'm just saying in how you it's both necessary. Remember, Ramak and Arizal were colleagues, and they're both necessary. We're not talking here at all. This is not a popularity contest.
But the Ramak also knew all of these dargahs from Keser until Ark and
Yeah, but the expression is Lo Yoda Me'inyan HaTzimtzum. That's the Lashon from the Tzemach
how did
Tzedek.
he explain Ark and the Shimon?
Ilav Ol, ultimately, with a form of Ilav Ol. And they basically go to a ceiling and they can't talk about beyond. You can't talk about the real beyond. Everything goes ultimately is a form of cause and effect. Very distant cause and effect. But ultimately, that's exactly what he says. Everything he speaks in Il, if you look on page Shin Chav Tes, he says, everything that Ramak you have to say is in the form of Ilav Ol. However, very distant Ilav Ol. There's ultimately a Hishtavus. That's the whole point I'm making here. Even Esses Sfiras Agnuzis, you can't speak before the Tzimtzum. Say Esses Sfiras Agnuzis is a higher level, very high level in Ein Sof. Like that.
The Ilav Olol, how could it be Ilav Olol?
Well, may I just explain the whole Arichas here about that?
If it seems to we understand it.
So the Ilav Ol is the other option. Without Tzimtzum, you have to speak about Ilav Ol, which means you ultimately have to speak about godliness and is commensurate with existence. And that which is beyond, we don't speak about. We just don't go there. It's not part of our relationship. It's not meant for us to know. Like God,
You do go there through Emunah.
yeah, but Amunah is not Seichel. Amunah is not Achdus. That's just Amunah with that. Amunah and what? No, there's nothing to talk about.
Beyond.
There's no. You can't talk about a level before the Tzimtzum because there is no Tzimtzum. What we call levels before the Tzimtzum by the Ramak is unspeakable.
So it's more than.
Yeah, because it means it was not revealed to us. Like,
And the
And
Rameh,
Simpson brings the.
how does Rameh?
no, you could speak Lifnei Tzimtzum once you know that a Lakus is Nishan Dayan Gedorim. But if a Lakus is your Gedorim, to speak before Tzimtzum doesn't make any sense. What do you mean? All you know is what he relates to you. Like I told you, you know the Father that bends down to you. What are you talking about the Father you don't even know about? You don't even know that you don't know. At Kedei Kach.
Etzem and Eir also appeared. Where did they appear?
Etzem and Eir, my assumption is, because here the reverse happens also here. According to the Arizal, as I've explained a number of times, because he understands the Shalei Berach, that's why he can also say that Keser Atik is Tachtena Shebemaitzel. That also is not the language of Ramak. There's no Tachtena Shebemaitzel by the Ramak. Ramak is Keser. Keser is a Nivra, is a Sfira. When we Tachtena Shebemaitzel. So it's a Ketzer Chiberech. That's what I'm saying. You know why? Because the Tachtena Shebemaitzel of the Azizal is not because we relate to God, it's because God, in His power, can plant something in us. But that's only possible once you relate to the Shalei Berach, or else you can have Tachtena Shebemaitzel. By Ramak, it's not possible there's a Tachtena Shebemaitzel in existence. Because that part, because there's no Tzimtzum to account for the Shalei Berach.
What are these words in the Kitzur here?
Hold on, one second. Let me just say this. I'm assuming, and I want to emphasize it, that I think it's dependent on the Chiddush of Eir and Chassidus. Because Eir can carry Bilt Mitzias Nimtza into Mitzias Nimtza because of its Bittel, so Atik, on a lower level, can carry Tachtena Shebemaitzel into Keser.
Okay.
And the Tzimtzum is what deals with the Shalei Berach, so you don't have that problem. Because if you don't account for that, all this becomes impossible to relate to, because you're thinking God is too close to us. In other words, you need to create infinite distance before you can bring. You need Havdalah before you bring Achdus, basically. That's the interesting paradox. If you have complete bittul, if you have complete bittul, then you can have panay lo yiro. If you have lo yiro, you can have panay also in a form of yiro, basically. That's the difference. Ramak panay lo yiro is kipshute. There's no way you can see it. Simsa kipshute is b'chlal nishtakim panay lo yiro. B'chlal means it's not b'chlal off limits. You know, and Rasisa Cherai, how they would teach it would be good. You see how God manifests in existence. But according to that is that you can have. So yes, Atzmus is definitely understood in a far deeper, higher level, according to Chassidus and Arizal, for sure. Not that they believed in a lower Atzmus, except they didn't have a language about that Atzmus. That's what I would say. You know, because they also, if you ask the Ramak, when he wouldn't understand that Atzmus is Nish Mugdir and Akein Gdorim, of course they understood this. But it's something that doesn't. So fine, that's a fact. But so what do you don't belong there. The Chassidus could talk about it. No, but there's always. That's why I always tell you. You talk about it only after the preface and the snatzl, the qualification that you can't talk about it. Because as soon as you talk about it only because God wants you, allows you to talk about it, not because you were about to say you with your intelligence reached there. That's the key. You don't want it to be because you have a commonality. You're talking about it because the Rebbe revealed it to you, and say, I'm giving you permission to talk about it. That's the difference. That's a major difference. Because first of all, because the whole point here is if we become anyway common with God, then what's the point of the whole thing? Then might as well we can be God. Then we're just a little diminished form of God. There's a need to know that we are not God, period. And then when you have that bittul, then God says, if you do that, then I'll let you know me in ways that you would never have known. That's what it comes down to, ultimately.
The Rebbe Rashab said,
So, you want to know something? I'll tell you another thing. Yeah, and I'll tell you something even more. Right. And he said it, well, Sefer Ikrim zogt ilu yadaiti v'yisiv. He said it in Nechusa.
He said it in Nechusa.
Right. That could be, but the expression in the Ikrim, it's the same problem. It's the same thing. The Ikrim, he says ilu yadaiti. If I knew it might be him, he says it bitmiyah. You can't. It's not that way.
It's impossible.
Right. Why? It's the same thing, because I think I have a reason why. I think also the bittul, therefore, today is far deeper than their bittul. When there was the Beis HaMikdash and the Der Deya, their bittul was not the level that we have here today. First of all, they were far greater people, so it was harder to have such bittul. And it was not their Aveda. Their Aveda was in Giluyim more. Today we have far more like the Bas Legani, the Anshe Chayil, the simple soldiers. Because what we're discussing requires very profound levels of bittul. That it could be like the Talmidei Rabbi Akiva and the Gedalim didn't have as much. I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm saying that with Giluyim, their brilliance was of such nature that their relationship with God was based on brilliance, not based on, only Ish Pashut can have such a connection. So I could think that's the way the difference. So the Deiros Achreinim, like Ikvus and the Meshicha, have less Giluyim and therefore far deeper bittul, and therefore maybe we're kalim to understand this in ways. In other words, the Ikrim went with Seichel. Seichel, I could know God. If I knew him, I'd be him. The Rambam went with Seichel. What was the Seichel? But a great Kedusha, Seichel of Kedusha. That Ruchnis is closer to how could a goof appreciate godliness like a neshama? Saying the Ramak went with that. How can we relate to God? Through Mahuchan, Nafata Chanan. But it was Arizal and the later generations that bring a level of bittul and Shalei Berech, which answers another question in my mind now. In Tanya, Perek Memtes, he says, interesting, he says about the Tzimtzum. He says, just like God put himself on the side in order to create us, we should put ourselves aside in order to serve him. It's a Meredikavart. It's a Hera, in Hera, because the Chayre Tzimtzum, you usually learn that Tzimtzum, Tzimtzum was God, they had to conceal, so we should exist. We should be able to have free, independent choice and be independent. There he says that Tzimtzum has a lesson to us. Like God put himself aside, we have to put ourselves aside. In other words, the Tzimtzum is Ayirah Bitl. So the Bitl that Tzimtzum teaches us, because it's not just God put himself aside, you put yourself aside. It means that Tzimtzum introduces a Bitl that doesn't exist without Tzimtzum. Very interesting. Yeah. Remember, the Shalei Be'erech that Tzimtzum teaches us is a Shalei Be'erech in Giluyim. Because Atzmos doesn't need a Tzimtzum to be Shalei Be'erech. To say Atzmos is built to Metzias Nimtza, that he's here and not here, doesn't need a Tzimtzum. There's no Tzimtzum in Atzmos. So Tzimtzum itself is a message in Giluyim. That even in your world of Giluyim, don't think I'm similar to you.
Yes,
So in Giluyim it's a Shalei Be'erech.
It gives you a higher
But he didn't really
understanding in
move to
Atzmos.
himself. That's
Exactly. Because the more you understand it in our terms, the more you relate to Atzmos is built to Metzias Nimtza, for sure.
And he didn't move to himself.
Atzmos doesn't need to be Mevat. We're not talking about
What
Atzmos.
does it mean in men?
He doesn't talk about Atzmos. Atzmos, there's no Tzimtzum in Atzmos.
What does that mean in mankind?
In the Oyer, that the Oyer removed itself. Yeah. Everything plays itself out there. That's where the relationship takes place. The relationship with Atzmos only comes as a result of our relationship with Giluyim. Let's make it clear. You cannot have a relationship with that. Because there's no relationship words there. Atzmos can have a relationship with you without you knowing about it. That's not the kavanah. That would be like God created you and he has a relationship with you, you never see him on your terms. There's no purpose in that. The purpose is that we have it in our terms. Dirib Tachteinim, the paradox is, you have a dirib Ta'atzmos, but only when you know it's Tachteinim and there's Elyonim. The word Tachteinim is not even shaykh to Atzmos. You can't say Tachten in Atzmos. You say in Giluyim, you say the air was this, Tachteinim.
You can't even say Elyonim without it.
Exactly. That's my point. There's no Gili and there's no Helam. Gili and Helam is actually tools for us to relate to the whole experience. And let's sum that up. So
This itself is Be'otzim.
everything is Be'otzim. But remember, a Rotzin of Elokus, of Atzmus, is a Rotzin Atzmi. Which means this itself is part of it. Remember, just like Metzias built to Metzias Nimtza is Sheil everything, it's also Sheil that it's Sheil everything. So it's not like when you understand Giluyim, you're like outside of the picture. It's just not the whole thing. The bottom line is it all helps us experience the entirety as much as possible of Atzmos in every possible way. The distance, the closeness, the Gili, and so on.
Can you read the Kitzur now through this mirror
For sure.
lenses?
The kids sit on page Lamed Aleph. Yeah, fine. I just want to say, so let me just sum up. So basically in chapter Kuf Samach Daled, which clearly we're reviewing again now, but I think it's worth it. This is a very fundamental talk here. Conversation. You agree? Because it's like the whole picture.
I would need some
Powerful.
more.
No, I'm glad we're recording it. Now, unless the time has come that maybe, there could also be a hell of a hester and this recording didn't work. If God doesn't want it to be. Atzmos may not...
Also, 11 o'clock when they have the chorus.
How does that fit into the Gilu? How does that fit into the Richuk and Gili? Just in case you think you figure it out, God sends and someone gives you a ticket. You realize that it comes down to earth. Okay, so let me just say this. So the end of the point is, page Shin Lamed is very, very vital, where he says that Ak as Mamutza comes into play in the context of Gili. Once you have Gili, Ak is a Mamutza that brings from a klal to a prat, from the general picture, like the blueprint, to the specifics. But the element of Richuk, like he says here, אבל אין כן עניין המצויס אק אין זה מצד האין אינסוף שבחינס אין ערך כי מדרב מצד המדרגס אין אינסוף שבחינס קירו ובחינס שייקס על האלמס. The key line there, you see that?
Where is it?
Im Kain, the line starts with Im Kain, right in the middle. Im Kain עניין המצויס אק אין זה מצד האין אינסוף שבחינס אין ערך כי מדרב מצד המדרגס אין אינסוף שבחינס קירו ובחינס שייקס על האלמס שבו בחינס גילי. Or the b'derech klar b'chinas er pnim b'shu b'chinas akav. Okay, so the ein hareich is atzmus, like he says afterwards. Amnon l'gab b'chinas er, l'koshkel l'gab b'chinas er pnimi, shem nimded, v'yarech b'chinas ein b'chinas ein hareich l'gamri. So you have both elements, the ein hareich from the tzimtzum, and you have the erech that Ak provides. I have no problem reading the parentheses. Are we not going to learn the next mimer? Probably not, huh?
No.
Okay, fine. There's always Sunday. So Kitzur, I can read it again.
It's a big review day, right? We don't get any place outside.
I've reviewed this a lot, this topic, but it's fundamental. I also wanted to connect it to the whole Hemshech. It's interesting. It also stems that Arizal should be like Matan Torah, and the Ramak should be like the Ovis is very consistent. Because the Shalah, I've shown the Shalah came to Israel at the end of his life, like Ramban and others did. He was a big Rav in Krakow and other major, Shalah Kodesh, Yitzchak Horowitz. So on his way, he came through Damascus, and there he met the Rav Chaim Vital. It was after the Arizal's Istalkus already. Rav Chaim Vital showed him the writings of the Arizal, which he had never seen before.
His writings of the writing.
He wrote everything. He was the writer. He was the scribe.
Shalom was that a Kabbalah?
He was, but he only used Kabbalah till the Arizal. Most of Shalah, you see that. But then he rewrote. You could see that he added the Arizal everywhere.
Wow.
He went back for sure. You could see because he had written Shalah already. He went back and wrote. But he's a line that he writes in Shalah, which, if you know the Shalah was a Gadol Shabbat. There was no Slach.
That we used to learn him.
Yeah, Shalah. Shalah is like one of the biggest. Shalah writes that when he saw these writings, he writes clearly. He says, since Matan Torah there was no such Gili.
Wow.
You know what that means?
You read this?
Rashbi, Zohar, Shas, Poskim, everything. Since Matan Torah there was no such Gili.
Wow.
The result clearly was completely different, as I mentioned, impossible to understand. He was on the scene only a year and 7 months, 8 months. Then they passed away in 37 and a half.
Before that, he was not known.
He was a Talmud of the Shittim Mekubetzes, in Egypt.
Ashkenazi.
Yeah, Betzal Ashkenazi. There's Rizal.
No, who is the Shira Mekubet?
Betzal Ashkenazi.
Betzalel Ashkenazi?
Yeah.
Where was he?
In Egypt.
In Egypt.
They were from the Gerish Svard. The Rizal was the years tough. What was the Rizal's years? It was after Tachvatat. The years.
It's 450 years.
The Rizal was the year. Shin.
450 years ago.
Yeah, so the year approximately Shin. What was that
This
Rizal?
book came out, doesn't talk about that.
The Tachvatat is after that Rizal.
After that is 1648.
Right. That Rizal was the 1500s. Right. Or not.
Khmelnytsky, the pogroms.
What's that? That Rizal is, one second, why am I so confused? That Rizal Shin Chav Hey, probably Shin Chav Vav, if I recall correctly. Yeah, is that right? That's correct, right? 500 years. 400. Yeah, well, now we're tough Shin Ayin Gimel, so approximately, yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. But he was on the scene, he came to Tzfas, first he came to Yerushalayim, he said there was too much klippas there.
Much clippers.
He said, gesagt. I mean, Kedusha, but it's the hell.
I mean, he was born in... There was a lot of clippers because it was too much Kedusha.
So he was born in Egypt?
I think so.
But then Tzfas has less clippers.
He may have been born in Israel, actually.
He lived in Israel for a very short time.
He may have been born in Israel, Yerushalayim, then came back. I'm not sure. It says that the Shem Agdelim, the Chidor writes about the details. Yeah, the Arizal. Then he came to Tzfat, and all the Gedolim were in Tzfat. Almost every major force in Jewish history was there. Beis Yosef was there. The Ramak, the Shlomo Alkavitz, the Alshach.
Sefer Haredim.
Yeah, I mean there are 30, 40 giants.
I heard from my
And he came there,
I don't know.
and immediately was seen as a Isha Laki, and that was that. And nobody disagreed.
Rizal was the Rebbe, Shlomo Alkavitz was the Chazan, Rabbi Yosef Karo was the Rov, and the Baal Sefer Haredim was the Shamash.
Yeah, it was a collection as it was Dafzazan.
Sie gehen Armenian, sagst du.
Maybe it was Dafzazan. There was no Vada call necessary when you have such a. It's the Vada call. You want to know who you're a Gilgal from? The cats, maybe. The cats running around Tzfas with the Vada call.
That would be
Huh?
even them.
Rabbi.
Anyway, but it's a scene that the Rizal. Well, why am I saying so knux? I'm saying it because that stems that the Rizal is like Matan Torah. The Ayar Chodosh. Chidush. So he's like introducing a Shalei Be'erach. That's what happens by Matan Torah. See, before Matan Torah, what do the others get to? Eir HaGvul. The Sherish Eir HaGvul. But at the end of the day, it's commensurate. It's Ad Bli Dai, or B'Sinachod for Dai. Mamish like the Ramak. The Ramak is the explanation of the others. And the Eir Chodosh, a completely Shalei Be'erach, Dika Eir HaBli Gvul. Abba Ve'ime Eloyin, that is That's what almost clearly says it here. I wish he spelled it out. It would be a lot geschmacked. But no, but I could see why not. No, there's a place where the Rabbeim, leave it for your imagination.
Too much yesh line.
But it sounds very much, very, very, it definitely stems in the Havana of it, 100%. And it's in the context, so it's very, very clear. It's very interesting. So Matan Torah, when it says that Elyenim Yordu Lamata, Tachtein Yaleh, it's not that God came closer to us. It's like the Hatokas Atzmus. Is that Atzmus, which is higher than everything, and Shalei Be'erech, it's not the Galakuz that the Ovis had. They had Shmiya Vaylein Daiti Lehem. They didn't have that level. That would be like the Ramak Yodam, they didn't have that Shalei Be'erech level. Matan Torah, the Chiddush is that Shalei Be'erech came down. Not the Erech, because it's the Chiddush. The Ovis also had Elokuz Be'erech. They had the Havaya, they also had Gili Havaya, but Havaya through Shaddai. The Herst. So what would be the Chiddush? The Matan Torah, the Chiddush is not that Elokuz came down, is that Elokuz that's higher than everything came down, and that's why it can transform the world. The Ovis, it was not the highest levels of Elokuz, that's why it can't change the world. This was far higher levels, and that's why it can change. Anechi. That's the Vort. Yes. It's Chapatas. It's Beida Maila then Ketz Lamata then Tachlis. No, the lower levels, it's lower level and it goes till here. Higher is here and it goes till here, like that. That you have to say that's the Vort. Wow. Omnam, you want to read the parentheses? Okay. Omnam Chochmas HaTeirah Chochma Da'ak Moshla Kadmeni Ak Lavush La'Ein Seif. Primordial metaphor, and Ak is a Lavush La'Ein Seif. Dini Aku B'chinas Mamutza, because Ak is a state of an interface. V'aloi hu Adam de Bria, Frexel the Shaz Lach Bria. Adam de Bria. It's a structured world. The answer is that we're not talking here Mamutza Tzvishin Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum. We're talking here the Ha'inyan Hu the Yisavas Ha'elim Usayadei Tzimtzum. Yisavas Ha'elim is that's through Tzimtzum, not through Ak. V'zeu Shegila Arizal, and that's what that is all revealed. The Mekabolim HaKedmim Choshvu HaKol B'chinas Al Il V'ol. The early Kabbalists, they understood everything for them was from the perspective. We say Choshvu HaKol. Not that they thought it through. Choshvu, they're measuring. Their way of measuring, their way of understanding was everything B'chinas Il V'ol. And that's where the Ramak, after he distances the level of Keser from Erech Ein Sof, Kosov, Etzem HaKeser, B'chinas Mishtava HaMaitz LaNetzel. That the Etzem HaKeser is ultimately is a level that's Mishtava, that makes a commonality between the Maitzel and the Netzel.
But on the other hand, Marchik is a Keser Melech Ein Seif.
Exactly, like I just said. Since it's not Mamash Ein Arech, that's why there's a Shtavus.
It's a different matzah,
Different level, not a different matzah, a different level.
Different level of a matzah,
yeah. Yeah, for sure, he said that beferish. said clear, the Ramak also has an Ein Sof. So Ramak also wants to talk about a God that's beyond us. Ramak is not trying to make God similar to us. But his beyond, without Tzimtzum, can only go that far with Seichel. That's the point. That's what he's saying. So he's Marchik Taka, and he says Nachman. Remember we said that, let's go back to the example. Keser, the Gabe Ein Sof, is more distant than Keser Legabe Nevraim Hashvelim. But it's still closer than the Nevraim Hashvelim are. So remember we spoke about numbers? 1 to a trillion is equal to a trillion to Ein Sof is equal to 1 to a trillion. Mamash equal.
But still a trillion is closer to...
No. A trillion is closer to 100 trillion. But let's think of numbers, the set of numbers. 1 and a trillion, even if they're both finite, but they're both connected to the infinite set of numbers. What about sand? Sand is no relationship to numbers altogether. There's no value. I explained this before, that the chesed in the finite of Kesed is that it's not more. But what it is, Ein Sof recognizes. The Ein Sof that Arizal will introduce doesn't even recognize what you are, not only what you're missing. Understand? The whole thing does no value. The whole thing is...
Yep.
And be'emes, in truth, it's not possible to make any type of commonality. And that means that that's understood through the tzimtzum. And Kesed Ramak holds that it's a Metzias Misave, something that was created of a substance. And Arizal Atik is Ein Sof, a carbon copy, a copy. Or we said a Hataka was a piece of. What's the interface of Ak? Ak is doch Shalei Berech. The answer is, since the Isavas in actuality is through revelation. That's why first you have to have the creation in a general way. That's Ak. So we see that Ak is not compared to the Ein Sof that's moved, that's separate. That's where Tzimtzum comes in, and Eir also comes in. We learned this.
The way back.
Yeah. So the neshamas are rooted in the Pnimius. The Pnimius Akira. So bottom line is like this. Eir hagvul oira bli gvul, create relationship through closeness. So Shir Atzmi B'Keach, in the Eir bli gvul, he envisioned a specific structure, a specific vision of spheres. Tzimtzum is Zichuk, Shalei Berach, Kelim. Ak in Gilui makes the Gilui closer, from Klal to Prat. That's the fourth. So Eir is the closeness. Eir and Ak are similar in that sense, and Tzimtzum is the hell.
Next to Mama is all about Ak.
No, that's good, because he's going to go now to the Tzimtzum. Now he's going to go to the Tzimtzum.
Yeah.
Okay, so we did yet another, I think this is part 6 of chapter 164. So we'll stop here, and we never actually began next Maimer, so we'll do that next time.